Story 1. I started to realize I felt guilty for things that weren't truly wrong and didn't negatively impact others. I now don't need the interpretation of good and evil from others. I just do my best to be a good person on my own terms. Story 2. I was raised in the Church of Christ. Women are not supposed to speak in front of men. Instead, they are supposed to filter their voice through their husband or father. My father has Alzheimer's, and my husband, who was also raised in the church, abused me, cheated on me, lied, stole, and harmed our children. I also witnessed them drag a 16-year-old gay child to the front and excommunicate him in front of over 1,000 people. It was a harmful and oppressive environment. Story 3. One of my 4 sons is gay. I love him without reservation. The church says he is a sinner because of who he is. I am out. Story 4. It just wasn't fulfilling anymore, and I concluded that most people use religion as a cover for their flaws. Story 5. As a child, it was absolutely boring. As an adult, I do not subscribe to the teachings. Story 6. The last time I went to my church was my mom's celebration of life service. It has been 8 years, and I don't think I can set foot in the building without tears. Story 7. When I was going through my divorce, my pastor called me and suggested it might be best if I did not return to church until I had my life together. My ex-wife remained and was welcomed with open arms. So, I am feeling a bit disillusioned. Story 8. I was a regular churchgoer for most of my life, as was my wife. Our kids were baptized, we were active in the choir, taught Bible study, participated in volunteer efforts, and did it all. When my wife was diagnosed with metastatic cancer, her treatments became very tough, and her health deteriorated rapidly. This was before the Affordable Care Act, and she wasn't covered under my employer's insurance plan due to pre-existing condition clauses. We had been tithing regularly and giving extra toward the church's new building fund. We had to stop that to make ends meet but continued to tithe what we could. The senior pastor contacted us to ask why, and I explained the situation. He expressed his wish to hold a special prayer session for her health. We attended the session, which involved laying on of hands and the whole process. It was emotionally nurturing, but her health continued to decline. Each visit brought more bad news. Finally, she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and given only months to live. Our pastor approached us once more, wanting to visit our home. During that visit, he looked straight at her and suggested that she must have some hidden sin preventing her healing, claiming this was God's way of prompting her to seek a better path. My wife was sitting there, oxygen tubes in her nose, with no hair and having lost 60 pounds from her vibrant pre-cancer self. She could barely speak above a whisper, yet he had the audacity to accuse her of committing some hidden sin that was stopping God from healing her. I threw him out of our home. I refuse to worship any deity that requires manipulation of their creation to elicit praise. That's unacceptable. She passed away as one of the most wholesome women I've ever known, and several years later, I learned that the pastor had been abusing several children in the congregation. If a higher power exists, it is not in any church. Churches seem designed to glorify evil men. Story 9. I attended a Baptist university where they were constructing a new football stadium. One day, at the dog park, I spoke with a professor who was also a preacher about the new stadium. We were both excited to learn that neither of us believed the stadium was a good idea. I will never forget the look of disgust on his face when I expressed that the funding should be directed toward assisting the largely impoverished community surrounding the university. He believed the funds should be used for building more churches. At that moment, I realized that I have fundamentally different morals and ethics compared to churchgoers. Story 10. God is everywhere in the universe. The only thing that is solely inside the church is the collection plate. Organized religion is a business and has historically been a form of social and political control. Story 11. The group couldn't keep me trapped with their lies. For context, I was in the Mormon Church. I don't think all churches are cults, but the Latter-day Saints Church is. Story 12. There are many insincere individuals who believe that Christianity and political beliefs are intertwined. Additionally, there are those who depend on God but are unwilling to take responsibility and address their own issues. Story 13. My answer is much less sophisticated or profound than most, but it's simple. Church is boring. Story 14. I came to realize that organized religion is a man-made creation intended to control people and make a few individuals wealthy and comfortable. Story 15. I never really could connect with anyone in the church. They were too focused on religious matters. They didn't seem capable of having conversations that didn't revolve around the church or the Bible, and I can't just talk about that all the time. The level of closed-mindedness was quite infuriating, and I couldn't continue to deal with it. Story 16. During COVID, they did nothing to help people and were more concerned about their own interests. Additionally, they appeared to be particularly interested in children. Story 17. Religion didn't make sense anymore. Why believe in a several thousand-year-old story that the supposed deity didn't even write? The Christian Bible was written by humans, for humans. I will believe in a deity when they show themselves directly. Story 18. I realized they all worship a mythology similar to stories about Greek and Roman gods. As I looked around, I noticed that many supposedly good people were actually quite troubled. Mean, racist and homophobic, far removed from the actual teachings of Christ. If Jesus were to see what his followers have become, he would likely be saddened. I have only met a handful of genuinely good Christians who live according to Christ's teachings. The others seem to be pretending. Story 19. It was never for me. I felt like I was pretending to be there, and I was fairly confident that most others felt the same way. Story 20. I stopped going out of boredom. I don't find God boring, but I do find some preachers boring. They often speak for too long. I don't believe sermons should last an hour and a half or more. It's difficult to find a charismatic speaker who can hold my attention long enough to get their point across, and I just don't find it rewarding. I love God, but I don't love attending church. Story 21. My church found out that I am gay, and most of the members shunned me. I also came to realize that my church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, was a cult around that same time. Story 22. The first part was that I stopped believing in God and was not doing anything. The second part was that the church I grew up in was all lies. Story 23. I learned about the manipulative tricks they use to make people feel a certain way. It wasn't divine. It was mood lighting. Story 24. I walked away from a very liberal church. It had nothing to do with the church itself. I transitioned to agnosticism and felt no need to continue attending. I was in my late 40s and am now 60. Story 25. I started to think for myself and question the lack of science behind the teachings. If Santa wasn't real, then who was? Story 26. I still believe in God. I just don't believe in the people who claim to represent him, as if that somehow makes their hypocritical, superior attitude acceptable. Story 27. Churches should teach people about freedom in their relationship with our Creator, but they often make people slaves to their distorted views of what is written in the Bible. Story 28. I slept in one Sunday and loved it. I never went back to Sunday school. My oldest is in medical school, and my other children are great students. When people ask me how my wife and I raised wonderful children, I always say to make sure you are well rested. Story 29. I grew up in the church. One day, the pastor tried to tell me that if I didn't bring my friends to church, they would go to hell, and it would be my fault. That didn't seem logical to me, so I started asking questions. The answers were unsatisfactory, so I stopped going. Story 30. I stopped going to our family church when the pastor told me I was not allowed to leave my husband over domestic abuse unless he cheated on me. I left him anyway. Story 31. Oddly enough, I don't have a traumatizing story. I realized when I got older that I didn't hold those beliefs, so why would I continue to waste my time there? Story 32. Because when you really consider it, it's just people telling you they know what happens when we die. I'm not basing my life's ideology on something that's impossible to know. Story 33. The focus on appearances seemed to suggest that no one actually cared about what occurred behind closed doors, as long as they were not compelled to acknowledge it. It felt like nobody would care if their back teeth were decaying, as long as the front appeared nice. Story 34. Look at the Not a Drag Queen subreddit. 80 to 85% of the individuals caught there are affiliated with a religion, while the remainder are usually Republican politicians. Story 35. When I realized the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has an investment account worth over $6 billion, I was shocked. How is this possible? Why does it exist? There is so much that can be done with that money. Additionally, the way life church hires outsiders and requires all employees to pay tithing is troubling. Feels inappropriate. Any church that has an app accepting donations seems fundamentally wrong. Story 36. Hypocrisy. My own for questioning my faith while going against it, and others who claim to be Christians yet act contrary to Christ's commands. Story 37. I always knew I didn't believe in God, and I refused to go anymore when I was about 14 because I was too old to be forced to attend. Story 38. I realized that God and Jesus are significant figures in history, often interpreted as tools to exploit and oppress people. They may not be real entities but rather concepts created by humans to control the masses. Story 39. Bigotry is pervasive. Every church in various towns across multiple states was filled with bigots, and the congregation was firmly convinced that they alone had the truth. They believed they were the only ones who were special. Ignoring the fact that their own doctrines changed regularly, they faced the possibility that they could be wrong now, or that their ancestors were condemned alongside every person who died before a few years ago. This magical thinking is troubling. Story 40. I was raised in the church and diagnosed with depression. My pastor believed Bible study was the solution. A year later, I attempted to take my own life and was put on a regimen of medication. Around that time, I realized I didn't actually believe in God. I became a huge fan of science. Story 41. I stopped going when I was 14, and two different people, one of them the pastor, told me that dinosaurs never existed. I went home that night and said to myself, I can't let myself ever get that stupid. And I never went back. I was going 4 times a week. It was a big part of my life. Story 42. When I got old enough to realize it was just a fairy tale, and a disappointing one at that. My belief is to treat others with respect. Story 43. They openly stated that all gay people should be sent to California so they could eventually die off. It was a predominantly black non-denominational church called Agape, and they were supporters of Donald Trump, which was bizarre. That was my last time going to church, ever. This occurred in 2014, near a military base in Europe. Story 44. I was 17, and it became obvious that everything is fake. Some of the most far-fetched stories from 2,000 years ago dictate people's lives. I also cannot agree that stealing $10 had the same punishment like hell as a murderer. It seems fear-based to keep the masses easily controlled. Now that I'm older, I believe it's all just a response to people not having scientific answers and men being jealous that women create life. Story 45. I was never a strong believer in organized religion. I believe in God, but organized religion often feels like a source of manipulation and guilt. When my mom stopped taking us to church so she could show us off like a new handbag, I realized her faith was more for appearances, and I was just going through the motions out of obligation. I haven't attended since I was 18, and I don't miss it. I am 31 now. Story 46. Religion and the people who believe in it made me stop going. It is difficult. They can be some of the most troubling individuals on the planet. Story 47. Long story. My wife and I slowly started drifting apart when same-sex marriage was being legalized across the United States. Our Catholic Church was adamantly against it and circulated petitions to try to prevent a local referendum from progressing through the legislature. As you might guess, we support same-sex marriage. This made us angry and was when we began to split. The final straw for me was during my sophomore year of college at my university's Catholic Newman Center. I had found a great community of friends and support there and was involved in the men's Bible study group. Toward the end of the year, a leader of the Bible study wanted to talk to me. I had expressed that I wasn't interested in leading the group. I didn't want a leadership role. He sat me down in an office, closed the door, and verbally criticized me, saying, "Your mother wasn't hard enough on you. You haven't faced enough challenges." I had no response, got up from that meeting, and only returned to the building when the head priest wanted to discuss the incident. I haven't returned to the church or Catholicism since. There was too much shame, guilt, and negativity for me. It's better in the rear view. Story 48. After my separation and divorce, not one person from my church called to ask how I was doing. I grew up in that church and returned as an adult after moving back to my hometown. There are other reasons, but this one still hurts 3 years later. I will never go back to a Baptist church. I may not return to church at all. I still pray every day. Story 49. The increasing politicization of American churches has reached a point where most appear to be completely at odds with the message of the Bible. Story 50. The outright Trumpism, bashing of LGBTQ individuals and marginalized communities, and the hypocrisy were evident. I was a member of a praise and worship band. It became increasingly difficult. The amount of stress that was alleviated was quite surprising. I have no regrets. Story 51. It ruins the weekend. I can't make too much noise before 9 a.m. because our neighbors hear everything, and people should be able to sleep in on Sunday. Having church at 10:30 breaks up the day awkwardly because the morning is too short to do much, and after church, much of the day is gone. If church were at 9 a.m., I would probably go once a month or so. Story 52. Reality and science. When an idea that the church claims is against God's will or is considered a fact is proven wrong by science or begins to be accepted by society, the church suddenly accepts it and deems it correct. Evidence includes churches closing and being sold due to insufficient revenue. All religions should be taxed, as they function like any other business. Story 53. The McDonald's breakfast doesn't stay open long enough in my area, and I know I need to eat, or how else will I have the strength to vote against my own interests? Besides, I don't need anyone to tell me anything. All my knowledge is based on my own feelings that are easily predictable and manipulated. I would go to church because I believe it is good, but I know that God wouldn't want me to miss my 10 a.m. Mountain Dew, and Pastor Dan won't change the church hours for anyone. Story 54. I am overwhelmed taking care of my partner with dementia and my 21-year-old son with special needs. The thought of engaging with others and listening to their burdens is more than I can handle right now. I love going to church, but I am not in the right emotional state to hear from one more person in need. Story 55. Services became a spectacle, and studies became unproductive discussions. I attended church seeking moral guidance, but all it offered was a disappointing sing-along concert and a brief reminder of Jesus' love. That's fine, but I learned that in elementary school. Let's discuss more substantial topics now. Story 56. I have different reasons than most for not attending church. I am simply tired of going. I was forced to attend every Sunday for Sunday school, adult service, and coffee hours until I left home. My parents' pastor and my own pastor give me hope, but being at church at 9:30 a.m. on one of my few days off and being the only person my age there, while everyone else is either 20 years older or younger, leaves me without a real sense of community. If I need good news, I'll watch a service from either church on YouTube afterward. Story 57. Our priest passed away, and we were not fond of the one who took over. We tried a few other parishes, but ultimately did not feel a true connection to any of them. We stopped attending at the beginning of the pandemic and have not returned since. Story 58. I became free of religion and finally felt liberated from hypocrisy, judgment, guilt, and obligations. It was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I was 14 years old. I am 39 now, and I love my life and live respectfully. Story 59. I couldn't understand the hate directed towards people. I remember a time when I was 15 in church school, and my teacher said I needed to stop touching my hair because my male classmates would get the wrong idea. I was just tying my hair up. Story 60. I stopped going to church because I found a better church, the true church instituted by Christ himself. Story 61. I gradually became tired of listening to unkind remarks that did not align with what the person after whom the whole religion is named was saying. I was frustrated by witnessing none of the individuals there living their lives as he said they should, instead searching through the entire book for justifications for their existing behaviors and thoughts. I was disheartened to see that we were expected to do less than the bare minimum to be considered good Christians and Baptists. Eventually, it occurred to me that I was gaining no value from listening to an arrogant individual behind a pulpit, claiming to be an authority on the unknowable. Story 62. I asked my pastor about Jeremiah 10 and why we put up a Christmas tree when the Bible essentially forbade it. They asked me not to return. I was 11 and did not return. I explored witchcraft instead and never looked back. Story 63. Churches often act as hateful cults, with individuals weaponizing their religion to promote transphobia, racism, misogyny, and similar attitudes. Story 64. When I realized that there is no prime mover in the universe, I understood that everything is completely random and that only the natural world exists. Story 65. The hypocrisy became exhausting. Preaching about loving your neighbor and, in the same breath, condemning your neighbor. The Sunday crowd treats service industry workers poorly, driven by greed. Story 66. Around 2003 and 2004, we received 2 sermons in consecutive weeks. 1. Being homosexual is considered an abomination against God and is regarded as a serious sin that opposes natural law. It is a disgrace to the Lord that these individuals legalized same-sex marriage. Although these clergy members were caught abusing children, we should forgive them as Jesus forgave. This represented the Catholic Church in summary, and my entire family could not be part of this any longer. The hypocrisy was evident. Story 67. I grew tired of not hearing God the way the rest of the congregation did. I grew weary of prayers that felt like little more than empty words. I became frustrated with reading the Bible and constantly encountering barbaric ideas that have no place in the world. I was exhausted by the sense that everyone around me was acting out their beliefs just to maintain appearances. I couldn't accept it. I was brought to church as a skeptic, desperately wanting to truly believe, but nothing ever convinced me. People in the congregation were living the same misguided lives as those outside. There were divorces, drug addictions, and poor treatment of others based on mood. At one point, even as a child, I asked, what is all of this really for? What does it accomplish? It seemed like, for the most part, it was a setting where people gathered to talk and pretend together. It wasn't for me, especially if my attendance felt coerced by the threat of eternal punishment. No, thank you. I would rather face the consequences than miss that opportunity. Story 68. I'm an atheist. I stopped going to church once I really felt like I couldn't stomach Catholicism any longer. I was 14. Story 69. Mom, you don't want me to open this can of worms. Don't ask me why I resent religion. She continues to ask. For context, I am Black. Aside from the long list of issues I could mention, I find it insulting to be expected to follow the God of the people who enslaved my ancestors. And the older I get, the deeper my resentment becomes. Story 70. I realized that organized religion is about money and power rather than God, and that God does not exist. Story 71. I sat in the hall and was not allowed to participate in Sunday school after declaring that Jesus was a zombie and refusing to change my logical position on the matter. I was 8 years old. This was not my last time getting in trouble for the theory that Jesus is a zombie. Story 72. Most of the religious individuals in my family have been incarcerated for charges ranging from sexual assault of a minor and sex trafficking to murder. In my experience, the worst individuals often receive the harshest sentences. Some actions are unforgivable, and religion is not an excuse. Story 73. I enjoy sleeping in on Sundays. Can be boring. It has become too intertwined with right-wing religion. Story 74. When Christians in the church supported a man who has lived his life in direct opposition to the teachings of the Bible, they voted for him again as a convicted felon and rapist. Churches often prioritize money and control, which is why they support Trump. Story 75. It felt like pep rally days in middle school. All the social groups, a little reading to fill time more than anything while drinking coffee. A bit of music, a bit of excitement, pass the plate. Story 76. COVID prevented me from going, and the right-wing Christians and their portrayal of Jesus kept me away. I haven't missed it at all. Story 77. My son is transgender. He was accepted when he was female, but when he began transitioning to male, several congregation members expressed their disapproval. Then the pastor made an anti-LGBTQ comment, and we were finished. My son, who grew up as an altar server in that church, told me shortly after, "I know I'm going to hell, so what difference does it make? The church did that to him." Story 78. When I learned enough about history and science, I began to understand how manipulative and coercive religious leaders can be and how they use the church's rules to control and prey on weaker minds. Story 79. Seeing the terrible things organized religion has done over the years to those who don't believe or live a different lifestyle than what is prescribed by the church is disheartening. There are many stipulations on what defines a good person. I was told that if I didn't attend church every Sunday, God might punish me. I don't need religion to forgive me for my mistakes. I know I'm a good person because I treat others with the same respect I hope to receive in return. I help people in need when I can, not because a religion says it is the right thing to do, but because it is the right thing to do. And lastly, science. Story 80. I was literally told, "You're not a Christian," because I didn't believe exactly like them. The person telling me this was an abusive, violent alcoholic who grabbed me around my throat and caused me to suffer from sciatica because I had to carry her to her bedroom when she was passed out drunk. I am a follower of Christ, but I am not a fan of other Christians. I was also criticized by another Christian for buying socks for a homeless man with no feet to cover his stumps while it was below freezing outside. Then, I received a video from a popular Christian page that showed a monkey leashed to a wall being repeatedly attacked by a snake. They somehow did not see that as evil, interpreting it as, when Satan tries to get you but you resist. The dissonance of watching an animal being tortured while claiming to be a follower of Jesus is baffling. But it is quite common among Christians. I will not sit in a building and have a middleman between me and God. I align most with the Quaker denomination, but I do not view any version of the church as pure. They are all flawed and corrupt. Story 81. My family believed that if they didn't follow a particular sect, they would go to hell. They presented this as an absolute statement and not for discussion. The church decided that gay individuals could not be clergy, and as a result, they all changed churches. It became obvious that it was all fabricated. They left immediately. All hail Ramen. I am now a Pastafarian. Story 82. My mom and I started working for the Catholic Church, technically at the adjacent private school. We both heard and saw strange things that completely turned us away. My mom won't even do the sign of the cross anymore. One of the parents, a certified public accountant, was doing volunteer work and went through the financial records, discovering that money was missing. It was the exact amount I had heard the principal discussing. He was the only one with access to that money. The priest, who acts like a chief executive officer in such situations, denied any wrongdoing. The woman kept digging and found that the principal had no employment record on file. To work at a school, they require a clean police record. She couldn't find any record of him. It turns out he was undocumented. My mom went to a different church to seek advice regarding another issue she was privy to involving potential sexual abuse. The priest there mentioned that the diocese would just transfer that priest to a different parish. Long story short, the principal resigned and went into hiding at a seminary. Story 83. I was born and raised in a fundamentalist evangelical environment. It took me time to come to terms with the fact that I didn't believe much of what was being taught, and the most hypocritical thing I could do was continue participating. Additionally, it was distressing to see many of my peers elect Donald Trump in 2016. Thankfully, my wife, who also grew up in the church, had the same awakening, and we were able to leave together. I highly recommend the book, The Evangelicals, for anyone else experiencing or who has experienced this transition. Story 84. I was enjoying my Catholic youth group until the young earth creationists showed up. Condescending and ignorant attitudes are a difficult combination. They also insisted that we protest abortion clinics. When I expressed my concerns about these new adults to trusted leaders, I was told I had to listen to them. I eventually stopped attending, and my interest in religion diminished from that point onward. Story 85. Growing up, my life was consumed by church, not by my own choice. I had absolutely no life outside of going to school and attending church. My parents made sure of it. After spending so much time learning about God and the Bible, once I was old enough to think for myself, I realized that no one in my church was living by the very values I had learned from them. I tried to ask questions and point this out, but I was shut down and treated horribly for it. I was under 18 and not allowed to leave. They were racist and misogynistic, turning a blind eye to abuse and shunning those who struggled with mental and financial crises unless they were deemed good people. The things they shamed people for were superficial, trivial, and mostly personal choices that affected no one else around them. I came to the realization that I strongly disliked everyone in the church. Many non-Christians I knew were living by the values I was taught organically, without the constant threats and fear-mongering. The people propagating the threats and fear-mongering were the very individuals I thought would likely go to hell for their actions, based on actual Christian values. It took a long time for me to be able to leave because my parents did not support it, so I had to work hard and become completely independent from them to escape. I would much rather live the values I believe in organically than participate in an organization that uses thinly veiled religious language to justify their own hate, political violence, and sometimes literal violence toward others. I believe that much of modern-day Christianity is not actually Christian. Jesus would not claim them. It has become a hollow word now. Most of those people live their lives violating the commandment against taking the Lord's name in vain while claiming Christianity, yet behaving in ways that contradict its teachings. Meanwhile, they physically punish their children for using the term goddamn. Story 86. I realized the church only saw me as a source of revenue. The last time I went to church, they passed the collection plate twice. Story 87. My pastor retired. He was really cool. I wasn't very into church, but I went through confirmation because everyone I knew was doing it. However, when he retired, I didn't see the point anymore. The new pastor seemed nice, but the person who took over the youth courses was all fire and brimstone, saying things like, "Your friends are going to hell for believing in Jesus the wrong way. Unbaptized dead babies go to purgatory, and people in parts of the world that haven't even heard of Christ will burn in hell." We weren't even a radical religion, just traditional Protestants. Story 88. The religious hypocrisy is evident. You are anti-abortion because you believe killing is wrong, yet you support the death penalty. Isn't killing wrong no matter who does it? The commandment states, "Thou shalt not kill." It does not include the phrase, "unless the victim is a scumbag." Story 89. Born and raised as a Mormon, I was fully immersed in the faith, but I always felt uncomfortable. I internalized the belief that it was just me, that I was too sinful, needed to learn more, and needed to serve more. I carried this mindset until I was in my early 40s. One day, I came across a quote that resonated with me. "You will awaken when you stop agreeing to things that offend your soul." In an instant, everything changed, and I was free. Story 90. I stopped when I was taking care of my elderly mother full-time. I did not return after she passed away. I wasn't gaining anything from it. Now I'm back because my husband, who is active in church, suffered a stroke and needs my support to ensure he doesn't fall. If it were up to me, I would skip it. Story 91. I am no longer a Christian. To be honest, I don't know if I ever really was, but at 16, I knew for sure I did not believe. Therefore, I do not attend church. Nothing bad happened. I just did not see the point. Story 92. I am a preacher's kid. Around the same time I started developing my higher thinking skills, my dad had an affair with a married woman from our church. I didn't want to return to the church where my dad was disgraced. They never really liked me anyway. I found a better life without church or religion. Most of the reason I stopped going to church was because of what my dad did. But I also didn't go back because I had developed into my own person and I didn't hold any beliefs. Story 93. It all sounds like bad fantasy or science fiction. Much of it was also provably taken from earlier traditions, so it isn't even truly original. I wish more people would realize how evident it is that religions only exist to keep individuals complacent and distracted. Story 94. My mother was the most devout Christian I have ever known. Her passing from cancer in her 40s caused me to question everything. Once you begin to question religion, it falls apart quickly. Story 95. The last church I was a member of roughly 20 years ago was full of hypocrisy and infighting. I eventually decided I do not need to be around other people to practice what I believe. Story 96. I could not afford it. They kept demanding more money, sending additional envelopes, and calling to ask why my envelope had not been received last Sunday. It was clear whose presence was being requested. My wallet's, and I was just its chauffeur. I moved around to various churches and faiths. I visit a church when I feel the need, but I no longer attend. I am now fully agnostic. Story 97. Our pastor cheated on his wife with the children's director. As a result, the church eventually closed. I haven't actively searched for another one since then. Story 98. There is a lot of talking but not much action. Many people become too comfortable and do not connect or welcome newcomers effectively. Additionally, if you do not fit in with their existing friend groups, you may struggle to connect as well. Story 99. After enrolling in college full-time, working a full-time job, and attending dance classes, I was tired and used my Sundays to rest or catch up on homework. Story 100. Being forced from a young age to attend church started my dislike for it. Learning more about Christianity led me to develop a negative view of most religions. Story 101. I moved out of my house as an adult, and my parents were no longer making me. I told them at a young age, around 11 or 12, that I did not believe in God. Story 102. Apparently, my dad stopped taking us when my brother, who was about 4 or 5 at the time, wouldn't stop singing the hymns at the top of his lungs. Story 103. I stopped attending church when it ceased supporting its congregants and instead focused on granting the pastor more authority. Story 104. I looked around and saw people not practicing what they preached, some even with their boyfriend or girlfriend while being married to someone else. The final straw was when my brother, who attended the same church and worked at the same place, quit halfway through our shift. We carpooled. I had to find a ride home and later discovered through my wife, who also worked at the same place, that he told his wife we ran out of parts and were sent home. I told her we were done going to church with blatant hypocrites, and we never went back. Story 105. I had a wonderful priest, an excellent storyteller, a historian, a man of wisdom, and a pragmatic leader. When he retired, I realized he was the only thing I truly believed in. Story 106. I had a difficult time with the diagnosis of a progressive chronic illness that took away so much from my life. I know I am a good person and just could not accept that this is the hand I have been dealt. Story 107. Pastor delivered a sermon on how the Holocaust was retribution for betraying Jesus. Mom said, "That's enough of that." Story 108. Until Christian churches abandon the archaic rhetoric about the place of women in church and faith, I will never step foot in one again. Women are equal to men. All human beings are loved and deserve respect and care. Humanity is not above nature. We are part of it and need to be good caretakers of the natural world. Wealth should be used to improve the lives of human beings, not hoarded and used for evil. Fortunately, Jesus never said that church was required. He said that gathering anywhere in his name was enough. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.